Okay, folks, hello again. Nice to be back. Just for those of you who have been affected by Hurricane Michael, my sincere wishes and hopes that things return to normal as soon as possible and that no one sustained any lasting damage. After all, property is definitely worth something, but it can be replaced, whereas life can't. And hopefully everyone is okay. Unfortunately, it's going to have to be a shortish lesson tonight because I have to go to a community affair, a community meeting where possibly some of you read in the news there was a young 24-year-old boy from our community who was murdered just over a week ago. And there's going to be a big community commemoration tonight. So I'm going to be doing that. Supposed to be there already, but we're just going to have to cut it fairly short. Okay, not to dwell on negative things. Now, maybe something that's apropos. The whole concept of this week in the Torah talks about the flood and the time of Noah, and what it means to us, what it's all about, and what lessons we can derive from it. Now, what does the flood represent? Essentially, the flood represents a time of chaos. A time of chaos when everything is sort of drowning in whatever it might happen to be. The waters, often called the waters of Noah, but the waters don't necessarily represent only water, but also represent all the various troubles that overwhelm and flood us, perhaps on a regular basis for some people. And it's something that occurs in everybody's life and probably recurs in everybody's life as well. So it would be relevant to sort of look into it and try and derive some understanding of what it is all about and what we can learn from it. So one of the verses that deals with the flood is where God tells Noah to make an ark, Noah's Ark. We've discussed this before, where it tells him to make a window in the ark. We've discussed that many times. I don't want to go into that aspect of it, but there is another aspect of the verse, and it says as follows. This is in Genesis 6, verse 16. Verse 16. Genesis 6, verse 16. So it says like this: make a window for the ark, or a source of light for the ark. And then it continues and it says as follows: Tachtiyim, Shniyim, Ushlishim, Ta'aseha. Make it a 3-floor ark. In other words, it's 3 levels. The ark has to be 3 levels. Now, in a simple sense, the bottom level was for waste products, the waste of the animals and so on, everything that was in there. The middle level was for the animals, and the top level was for human beings. That is what the classical commentator Rashi explains. However, there are other explanations of this as well, deeper explanations, much deeper explanations that are given, for example, by the Baal Shem Tov, by the Rizal in the Zohar, and we will get to some of those ideas shortly. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you very much. And Alan, thanks for the good wishes. So, the one of the ideas is as follows: that the word teva, as we've explained before, the word teva in Hebrew, we usually translate it as ark, also means, it can mean an ark, it can mean a box, it can also mean a word. So every word, in other words, the words have 3 levels. Words have 3 levels. the words of the Torah have three levels, at least three levels. The Baal Shem Tov explains that these three levels are what are called olamot, neshamot, and elokut. Olamot, neshamot, elokut. Olamot means worlds, neshamot, souls, elokut, godliness. So in each word, you'll find these three levels. The level of world, the level of soul, and the level of godliness in the words of the Torah. The Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, uses somewhat different terminology. His terminology is ibur. Ibur means a state of impregnation. Yenika, that's I think it's called gestation, if I'm not mistaken in English. When a mother is feeding a child, the child's completely dependent on the mother, but the child is being born. Is that called gestation? Am I correct or make a mistake? Yeah. So anyway, ibur is pregnancy. Yenika, when the child is feeding from the mother, and moichin, when the child grows up and becomes independent. The independence of the independent child, where he achieves mochin. Mochin means intellect, where he's intellectually. Thanks, Shelley. Where he's intellectually able to think for himself and therefore able to take care of himself to a large extent. Okay. Now, what do they mean? What does the Baal Shem Tov mean? What does the Arizal mean? Both of them were talking real about the same thing. They were just using different terminology because of the different approaches to Kabbalistic concepts. Basically, the idea of ibur, when the child is in the womb, is a state of spiritual, of being spiritually undeveloped. It's being spiritually undeveloped. When the child is in the womb, it's an entity, it's a being, but it is undeveloped as yet, physically undeveloped, and therefore, in the analog, it's an analogy for spiritually undeveloped as yet. Yenika, when the child is suckling from its mother, gestation, is when the child has become an entity outside of its mother, but is nevertheless still dependent. This indicates a spiritual level that is immature, but not completely immature. It's dependent, but not subsumed. It's not subsumed into the identity of the mother, of the source of its spiritual sustenance. It is sustained by its spiritual source, but it's not absorbed in it. That's a period of gestation. Then the period of mochin, the period of intellectual discovery or intellectual independence to a certain extent, is the idea of the highest stage of development mentioned here. Now, the Baal Shem Tov, again, uses different terminology, but it's basically the same, very similar concept. Again, the Baal Shem Tov talks about olamot, the external aspect of things. Neshamot, the internal aspect of things, the internal drive, the soul of something rather than just the body thereof. When a child is in his mother's womb, it's just part of its mother's body. It's like an appendage to the mother's body. It's a living creature on its own. It has its own heartbeat, but it's completely dependent on the mother. And in fact, from what I understand from modern medicine, the heartbeat and the circulation of blood of the child, etc., is completely dependent on the mother as well. It's not a sort of an independent heartbeat. It beats by virtue of the umbilical cord and so on and so forth. Okay, I think that's the case. If anyone wants to correct me on that, that would be fine. The first stage, therefore, is a stage of externality. In other words, is a state of also spiritual immaturity, when the child or the person is completely dependent on their spiritual mentor, on their spiritual source. And then comes the level of neshama. So it's olamot neshamot. Neshamot means basically soul or consciousness. Consciousness of higher things. When the person starts becoming conscious of deeper forces of the inner forces, the why, not just the how of things, then this is already a higher level of being. And then we get to Elokut. Elokut is godliness, the inner core of everything. Godliness. Okay, so what does God tell Noah to do? At a time of chaos, at a time when the world is flooded, at a time when there is, first of all, evil covering, basically inundating the world, overwhelming the world, when there's a time of evil before the flood. That is the time to start making preparations, to start building the ark. In other words, to start building the levels of consciousness that one has in order to be able to comprehend and become conscious of godliness. Then the world is flooded with water. The Zohar interprets that flooding as not necessarily a negative thing. The Zohar says that whenever there's chaos, that chaos is followed by a new level of growth, because the chaos is sort of an in-between situation. Initially, in the beginning of creation, right in the beginning of creation, the world of tikkun, which is the world of rectification, the world as we have it now, the world of tikkun, was preceded by the world of tohu, the world of chaos. And that was preceded by a much higher level of spirituality. Now, that chaos was a transition point between the higher level of spirituality and a new level of recognition of that spirituality. So prior to the world of Tohu, there was a very high revelation of godliness, which could not be absorbed into a lower creation. And so the chaos came about in order that from within the chaos, the growth would begin. The growth of the world of Tikkun. The world of Tikkun is the rectification of the chaos. It takes the best of the world of chaos, the godliness that's embedded, so to speak, in the world of chaos, the sparks of godliness in the world of chaos, and rebuilds them into vessels which are able to come to a recognition of godliness. So therefore, the Zohar explains that the time of the flood, even though it was a chaotic experience, was nevertheless a purification. The flood waters, the rain fell, and the rain fell from above, and the waters open up from below, as it says, Arubas hashamayim niftachu, the windows of heaven, so to speak, opened up, and the wells from down below also opened up. As it says, this is the verse over here. This is in verse, this is chapter 7, verse 11. Nifku'u kol mayanot tohom, Rabba, the well springs of the great depths of the earth opened up. Varubot hashamayim niftachu, and the windows of heaven opened, so to speak. And there was rain for 40 days and 40 nights. Now that rain for 40 days and 40 nights, rain from above and the water coming up from below, says the Zohar, why 40 days and 40 nights? That is a hint to the idea of a mikvah. A mikvah is a ritual pool where one comes purified from ritual impurity. There's a pool of water that has to contain 40 sa'ah. Sa'ah is a biblical measurement, or rabbinic measurement rather, 40 sa'ah. That's like around 200 gallons. So it's a pool of water with at least 200 gallons that men and women, but men on a daily basis, should, on a daily basis, immerse themselves in this pool, this ritual pool, at least according to this is the Kabbalah tradition and the Hasidic tradition, to immerse every day, except the day of Yom Kippur and the day of Tisha B'Av, the Day of Atonement and the Day of the Destruction of the Temple. Those are the only 2 days where we don't immerse ourselves. And women immerse themselves generally once a month as a purification after their period. So, men immerse themselves every day, but they immerse themselves in a pool. Both of them immerse themselves in a pool of 40 sa'ah, about 200 gallons. This 40 is hinted to by the 40 days and 40 nights of the rain falling from above and the well springs opening up from below. But what's the important point here is that this, in other words, this flood was essentially a purification. Now, someone mentioned to me a very, very interesting thing. I was just in Florida a few days ago, and someone mentioned in Florida, was telling me the story, that there's a coral reef that this person was particularly involved in. One second, I'll get you, Shelley. This person was involved in trying to preserve the coral reef, and the coral was basically dying. As you know, coral is a living organism. It's not really, it seems to be like stone, but it's really a living organism. It's a halfway point in a sense between inanimate and animate. In any event, the coral was dying and had been dying for several years, and they were very worried that when the coral died, it would just like disintegrate basically, and then the coral reef, which protects the coast, would be protects the coast from a tremendous amount of rough water and so on, turbulence in the water, would lead to very bad things, and who knows what would be with the ecology of the planet and so on and so forth. Anyway, this person was telling me the most miraculous thing happened. There was a period of time when there were hurricanes in that area, 4 consecutive hurricanes over a period of a couple of years. But he said that they went to check the coral after the first hurricane, and they saw that the coral had been improved by the flood by about 40%. The next time it was another 20%, another 20%, until it was 100% okay after the fourth hurricane. So, even though we might think that flood is something detrimental and it's something negative, nevertheless, in some sense or another, there is a positive aspect to it. So too, and so therefore, the Zohar explains that the whole concept of the flood was a purification. It was a purification in order to get to the next stage. After coming out of the mikvah, so to speak, the world becomes a different world. Noah says, or the Midrash explains, Midrashic literature, rabbinic literature explains that Noah, after the flood, when he opened up the window of the ark and he looked outside, he says, Olam chadash ra'iti, I saw a new world. It was a new world. The significance of 40 days, like with the Israelites in the desert, there's a lot of there are a lot of important connections with 40. Perhaps we'll go into it another time. Let me finish this idea so we don't get stuck on or sidetracked into other things. It's a relevant question, but just maybe leave a question and answer for next time or something. Okay, so the idea is that the world was therefore purified, and now there's a new world. A new world. Says the Zohar, the same thing will happen in the 600th year, the sixth century of the 6th millennium. When did it happen? The 600 years, the 600th year of Noah. In other words, when Noah was 600 years old, or whatever, that's when the flood happened. Says the Zohar, the same thing will happen again in the future. The same kind of flood will happen in the 6th century of the 6th millennium. Well, the 6th century of the 6th millennium was in around the 1700s, the mid to late 1700s. Now, that was the beginning of the 6th millennium of the 6th century of the 6th millennium of according to the Jewish calendar. Now, what kind of flood happened then? Well, it wasn't a flood in the sense of water covering the earth, but it became a flood of knowledge. And that's what the Zohar said would happen. The Zohar says that it won't be a flood in the traditional sense. It'll be a flood of knowledge as a preparation for the time when we will come to the idea that the earth will be full of the knowledge of God, like water covers the seabed. That's actually a verse. And the verse states, and the earth will be full of the knowledge of God, like water covers the seabed. And the events since the 1700s, mid 1700s, in the secular knowledge, have indicated that this is indeed happening. The explosion of knowledge that's taken place since the 1700s until our time, and it's getting more and more incrementally more, not incrementally, exponentially. It's getting exponentially greater, to the extent that the ability of the human mind is likely to be expanded tremendously over the next couple of decades. Now, how exactly this will take place, we will see, but it might be through electronic means, it might be through other means. But as far as we're concerned, as far as the mystics of the world are concerned, let's put it that way, this will be a recognition that Raucho Basa Yachtav, all flesh together will experience, Kipi Hashem Diber, will experience the word of God that there is within creation. And within beyond creation as well, will experience the word of God. And that is the idea that is mentioned in the Zohar. What is the just one second here. What is the idea of the 600th year of the 6th millennium, or the 6th century of the 6th millennium? That is when knowledge will explode. And knowledge, not in a secular sense, but soul knowledge, the knowledge of God. In other words, initially what takes place is the lowest level that we explained before. That's olamot, the world knowledge, worldly knowledge, knowledge of the world, knowledge of sciences, and so on and so forth. The next level comes to the knowledge of the soul. So we see that the science of psychology only started really in the 1800s. But we're not only talking about psychology, obviously, even though that is what happened in the world. We're talking about a much deeper knowledge of the human soul that we still haven't fully achieved and we haven't fully realized. And that eventually leads to knowledge of godliness. That will be so obvious to everybody that it'll be like you'll see it naturally, like you open your eyes and you see the sunlight outside when you wake up in the morning. So too, you wake up in the morning and you'll see godliness outside. And that's the idea of seeing a new world. It's going to be the same world that there was before, but we'll realize that this world is inundated, permeated with godliness. And that is the whole idea of the flood. We need that purification That chaos initially, in order to come to the sudden, well, let's not call it sudden realization. It could be sudden, but the incremental realization until it becomes the exponential realization of the godly nature of everything. Therefore, the flood is not all necessarily all bad. It has its positive qualities, and we will be looking forward to experiencing them as soon as possible. Just for those of you who are interested, part of the second section of the course, which I started, the online course, which is the basics of Kabbalah. All the important basics of Kabbalah is now available at Kabbalah Decoded, hyphenated, Kabbalah Decoded, hyphenated, .teachable.com, HTTPS, etc. Kabbalah Decoded. If anyone wants, I can send you the link, or I can just type it into the chat box. So the second course is up, and it goes through the first, the concept of concepts that are brought from Sefer Yetzirah regarding creations, creation 1, and then there's creation 2, and then there's revelation. The whole series is about creation and revelation. This particular part of the series is about creation and revelation. So hopefully we'll see you next week, and I'll have to cut off now because I must go to this meeting, as I mentioned. So have a good week, everybody, and if I don't see you through the week, I'll see you through the window. All the best.